So is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we shall start with exception handling in C++. So let's see what an exception is. So exception is a mechanism to handle runtime errors. So you know that when you are executing a program, some errors may crop up, which cannot be caught at compile time. For instance, you have C equal to A by B, and if B value you read it as 0. So this result cannot be stored inside a computer. So this raises an exception. Similarly, you have an array, and array is of size, let us say you have only 3 elements here. But if you give array index as 7, this is out of range exception. You never know what that index value will be. So if I takes a value outside the size of the array, then an exception can be raised. So C++, or for that matter many other object-oriented programming languages, they all provide a exception handling mechanism. So how do I handle exceptions? So there are 3 parts here. First is the try block, in which you execute the program which might potentially throw an error, and there is a throw statement that will actually throw the error, and there is a block which is named as catch, which will handle the exception. So try, catch and throw will together will achieve exception handling. So the general form, if you see here, there will be a try block where you start the block with open curly bracket and end with a ending curly bracket. Within this you have to write the code. For instance, as I was telling you, you have 3 variables, and if you have expression C equal to A by B, so this might throw an exception. Okay, sometimes you have to yourself throw the exception, or there is a built-in function which will throw the exception. When the exception is thrown, the control will be transferred to this catch block. So you may have any number of catch blocks here. This is one catch block. Similarly, you have another catch block like this. For each exception, there will be one catch block. So we shall see through examples how these exception blocks will help handle different exceptions that might occur within the same block. So it is not that you have only one exception happening here. You may have a couple of statements. Each statement potentially throw an exception, and this exception can be of different types. So to handle exceptions of different types, there will be many catch statements. So before we move on to see how to do all this and handle multiple exceptions, it is important to understand what are the different types of exceptions. So they have categorized the exceptions as standard exceptions, then user defined exception, and non-standard or hardware generated exceptions. So in standard exceptions, most of the exceptions fall into, that is runtime error, logical error, bad allocation error, out of range error, invalid argument error. So all these errors belong to standard exceptions, and to handle these exceptions you require 2 libraries, std except and exception. Okay, so you need to understand that there is a class called as exception, in which the exception handling mechanism is built into. So we need to include that class, and for that you have to include this library in the header section. Okay, and user defined exception, is it that the program statement alone can throw exceptions? No, even user defined exception can also be built. So how to do that, all we shall see. One example of user defined is, let's say you have a bank account, and in that you are trying to withdraw some money, and if the amount is below the balance, then you can throw not enough balance exception. So you can define your own exceptions and throw them as and when the need arises. These non-standard exceptions are all generated by the system hardware. For example, within the CPU, whenever you try to do divide by 0, an exception will be thrown. But in C++, there is no mechanism to handle these non-standard exceptions. Okay, so you have to take care of any hardware generated exception. That is, whenever a divide by 0 happens, you have to handle it. Alright. So these are the three broad categories of standard exceptions which are available. And then these exceptions again can be divided into different kind of exceptions. For example, bad allocation exception, bad cast exception, bad type exception, and bad exception. So we shall see a few examples of this. Bad allocation happens whenever you try to allocate memory and there is not enough space. Okay, so for instance, you try to allocate far too much memory. Let's say 1 terabyte of memory. Your system has only 16 GB, and if you try to allocate more than 16 GB, it will throw this bad allocation error. Okay. Similarly, bad exception. Certain functions can be designated to throw only certain kind of exceptions, and if you try to throw anything other than the designated ones, then you will have a bad exception. We will be focusing more on to these logic error exceptions, in which we have domain error. For example, you have square root of x. This is a library function. What happens if x is less than 0? Okay, so we know that square root can work only if the value inside the square root is a positive number, positive or 0 number. But if it is negative, we know that it is the imaginary number. This cannot be calculated. So that is called as domain error. Similarly, invalid argument error. So if you pass an argument to function which doesn't result into meaningful calculation, then that is a invalid argument error. Length error. That is, if you have a string and if you try to resize the string length beyond what is permitted, you have a length error. And most obvious one is out of range. That is, you have an array, and if you try to go beyond the array limit, then you have a out of range exception. There are other runtime errors like overflow exception, underflow exception, range error, and all that. Alright. So having seen all the different category of exceptions, we shall see one by one how simple exception handling can be done within a program. Now, as I told you, we need to check each of these out of range or domain error or invalid argument and length error and all. So first thing that you have to do is first build a try catch block like this. Okay, and within the catch function, you have to indicate what type of error you are trying to catch. For example, out of range exception. Here you have a vector which is of type integers, and here if I say prices dot at, if I say 7, now we know that there are only 4 elements. If you try to access the 7th element and try to print it, this will throw out of range exception. So here you have to write const out of range. You have to pass a reference e, where e is a object of exception class and it contains the required message. So you just have to print that error message, and that error message is contained in a method called as what. So what tells you what really happened when you try to access an element beyond the array limit. So this is our first try catch block, wherein we are trying to handle the out of range exception. So let's see whether it goes through. As you can see, it says underscore n, which is 7, which is more than this arrow size. As I told you, vector has a size method which tells you what is the size of the array, which is 4. So if you are trying to go beyond value 4, then it throws this exception. So immediately you should know that this is a out of range exception. So along with this message, if you want to add your own message here, you can say out of range exception, and maybe you can put a colon here so that you know what it is. The message will be very clear. Okay, so out of range exception vector. Why that exception is thrown? Because it is not within the array limit. So but if I say 3 here, it will print the last element in the array. So let's see whether it does that. It will not go to the catch block this time. Okay, so it will correctly print the value at index 3. Okay, now what is important to understand is even when the exception happens, you can continue to execute the rest of the code here. That is beyond the try catch block, you can continue to execute the statement. Okay, so without handling the runtime errors, if you try to just execute without this try catch block, whenever the out of bound error occurs, the program will simply crash. You will not be able to continue the rest of the code. So now if you see, this time it goes through correctly because we are putting a value within the range. But if you try to increase the range and go past the size of the array, the exception is handled and the rest of the code will execute. Rest of the code, that last line will come up. Okay, is this point clear? How to write a try catch block?
Yes, sir. Sir, if it is out of range, then you're giving it const out of range, right?
Yeah.
For any other specific errors, we will have to specify.
Yeah, specify. And if you don't know what is the error that is likely to happen, then you just say exception here.
Okay, and we'll throw that whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you need not remember which exception it is throwing. It's a general exception class which will contain the information.
Okay.
Okay, so it will come up with the same error this time also. But if you know exactly which error is likely, then it is good. It will improve the readability of your code.
Okay.
Now, other kind of error is domain error. Okay, so let's say we have a variable here, and if you accidentally put -2 and try to print square root of x. Okay, so this square root of function will throw out it will throw domain error. Catch const domain error. So you are catching the specific error here. E dot what. So it will be always E dot what. That what will tell what actually happened within the try catch block whenever an exception occurred. So now you see this domain error is happening. Yeah. Do we have to throw ourselves if x? Yeah. Now this square root function is not throwing the exception itself. We have to throw this explicitly. So here if I have to check if x less than 0 or less than 0, then I have to throw domain error like this and specify the error. Okay, so invalid argument, something like this. Whatever message that you pass here, that is what goes into this error object, and when you say e dot what, this is what will come out in the output. Okay, and else you have to do this out. Okay. So as you can see, sometimes you only have to throw the error. So domain error, invalid argument. The rest of the code is this. So moment one exception happens, if an exception is happening at the next step, that is line number 27, there is also some exception happening, the program will not continue. it will directly skip out of this next statements and go to the appropriate catch block here and handle that catch. Okay, so whichever exception happen first, that is one will be handled and the rest of the code will be ignored. You may have many statements, each one potentially may throw an exception, and accordingly the handling will be done. As you can see, if I put 3 here, even though no exception is happening, this statement will not be executed. Just observe this, because prior to this there is a domain error. So the domain error will dominate and that will be handled and this statement will be skipped. Okay, so this is what is domain error. Now your question might be why I am throwing the domain error and why I don't have to throw the out of range error here. Okay, so this is a natural question, why the throw is happening automatically for the prices dot add. Now in vector is a class, right? It's a standard template library. So there is a built-in function called add. Within that the throw is implemented, so you don't have to explicitly throw here, whereas the square root function is coming from the C++ math library. There is no built-in throw implemented, so you have to explicitly throw it. Is the distinction clear between the two, or you have some doubt?
So why that prices dot add 3 will not get executed here?
Yeah, because see, when the exception occurs, it means the program is not correct, because anything which is going wrong in the previous statements, the value might be used in the subsequent statement, so it is not appropriate to continue with execution here.
Okay.
For example, the square root value you are using to store in the array, so that if itself is going wrong, so there is no point continuing, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah.
But how we will know whether that has this inbuilt throw implemented in that class?
So the way to look at that is, if there are any standard template library built-in classes which have methods, then there is a built-in arrangement. But if it is a library function like this square root without any class name dot something or object name dot something, then many times it is you only have to throw it. Okay. Now next thing is invalid argument exception. Now for this you have to write a function here. Let us say we are doing divide A by B. We are writing a function here and we are passing two values, float A, float B. Since it is your own function, you have to take care of the exception. So if B happens to be 0, then you have to throw that error. Throw invalid argument, and here you specify what message you want to be displayed. So division by 0 not allowed. Okay. In the else part, you can just say return A by B. Okay, so this is a function which when you call here, divide A by B. Now if I send 5 comma any other number, this goes through fine. Okay, but if this B happens to be 0, then it will throw invalid argument error. So I must catch it here. Catch const invalid argument e of e dot what. So I need not prefix any message now because I only have written the message. That is what will come out. So let's see, I am getting that error or not. Okay, so division by 0 not allowed.
Sir, if A consider A is 0, we have to write one function for that?
No, if it is 0, if A is 0, it is not a problem, no. You will get the result as 0.
Correct.
Okay, because division by 0 will result in an infinite value which will not be stored inside a finite machine like a computer. Okay, so if I send 5 by 2, then it will give you the correct answer. 2.5. Now domain error will occur because next thing is a problem, isn't it? So first statement will go through, but second statement you have a problem. But if you give correct value 2 here, that will give you correct answer. That square root of 2 will come out. Okay, likewise. So if there are no errors, that catch blocks will not be executed and you can continue properly. Alright. So that is invalid argument. Now this length error. Some data objects can have maximum length. For example, you have a string S. Okay, and if you try to reserve a length more than what is permitted, so if I say S dot reserve and there is a max size function that will tell you what is the maximum amount of memory you can allocate for a string. If you cross that by adding 1, this will result into length error. Okay, so we have to catch it properly. So here I can write these catch blocks anywhere. It will go to the appropriate catch block. It need not be in the same order as the statements. So here you will have length error %e cout e dot what end. Okay, so now length error will occur because you are trying to exceed the maximum permitted limit. As you can see, basic string and create. Okay, so that error it is coming on its own, right? But if you want to know what this error is, you can put little more information here. Max length exceeded. Okay, so that error is coming because you are trying to allocate more memory for the string than what is permitted. Okay, so far so good. Okay, now yeah, so one more last, that bad allocation, that is if you try to allocate beyond the array limit, then we shall see what happens. So let's say we have a size which is some large number and we have some pointers new so you are trying to allocate far too much memory, then this will result into bad allocation error. So bad array length. Okay, because your RAM size is maybe maximum 16 GB and you are trying to allocate let's say 1 terabyte, so it will throw that error. Okay, so would you like to try these things out?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just try this. So you start from here. So first thing is you include all these header files, exception, then standard exception, vector, string and cmain. These are required. And then maybe you can just divide A by B. So what all exceptions that we have seen so far, they are all standard exceptions, and if whenever such exception happen, you have to handle them in the catch block. So if you want to build your own exceptions, that is in your application you have a requirement, and if you want to build an exception, that exception is called as custom exception. And to build this, you have to build a class with the appropriate name. For example, not enough balance exception you want to build. So I define class not enough balance, and this should extend from the exception class. Remember, exception is a class, okay, and you are simply extending from that. And within this exception class, so there is a what method which is virtual, which you have to override here. And any exception that you write, you have to send some message that what actually happened. So for that you can define a local variable message, and since this not enough balance is a class, we can add a constructor in the public section, string, let us say m or msg colon message. You just initialize that message variable. So just the local variable is initialized through the constructor. Now here you have to override the what method. What method returns a constant string pointer to a constant string. Okay, so here we say what, and this what method should not throw an exception within its body. So you should say no except here, and you are overriding this what method which is there in exception. So within this you have to say return whatever is your message dot c string. Return value does not match. Member function declare override does not override base class. So what we have done is we have built a class called as not enough balance. So you can give any name, okay, it should be a relevant name, because when you have an account and you want to withdraw and if there is not enough balance, this is the most appropriate name to use. Okay, so let us create our application class, that is account, and within this we shall have only one member variable balance. Account number, customer name and all we can add later. And in the public section you have the constructor with some value coming from the main, and that you can use to initialize the balance. And now here we need to add our method, let us say withdraw. You want to withdraw some amount, and within the body of this, if balance minus amount less than 1000, then you want to throw not enough balance with the message here, insufficient balance, transaction failed, like this. Else balance minus equal to amount, and then we can print that amount. Transaction successful, balance so this is our application class, where this application class draw method is throwing the exception, and this not enough balance is our own defined exception. Now to test this, in the main you create first an account, let us say my account, and pass the balance, let us say it's some 2000 rupees, and within try catch block here you have to handle not enough balance exception just the way you handled standard exceptions. exactly the same syntax again. E dot what will tell you what happened, whether that's in the case of exception what happened. Okay, and within try you have to execute my account dot withdraw. Now if I withdraw 500 rupees or 400 rupees, there will not be any problem. Okay, but after we have withdrawn 400 rupees, if you try to, let us say, withdraw some 1700, it will not allow. Okay, so the first transaction will go through correctly and the second will not work. Just a minute, I'll confirm that syntax. Should be const no accept and then override. Anyway, that override is not mandatory, but if you want you can use that. Yeah. Okay, so now as you can see, the first transaction is successful. Balance is 1600 after withdraw 400, but second one is failed. Okay, and you got the insufficient balance, transaction failed. So this message which is coming here is what you wrote in your not enough balance class what method. Okay, so you initialize that string insufficient balance transaction. This you are passing as a value to the constructor of not enough balance, and that gets attached to this message, and this what method is simply returning the string version of the message that you passed. Okay, so this is the custom exception you can write for a given application scenario. Is this clear or you have some doubts?
It's clear, sir.
Okay, just try this out. Okay, so to summarize, exceptions are runtime errors, and exception handling mechanism is provided to make the program gracefully end and not abruptly crash. Okay, so that's the intent of providing the try catch block, and there are some standard exceptions which are already built in, which you can make use to handle these runtime errors, and C++ provides you a provision to write your own exceptions, and these are called as custom exceptions, right? So more on these we shall see in our next lecture.